In the quiet corridors of history, where shadows dance across ancient tapestries and moonlight filters through stained glass windows, there lived women whose stories echo through time like gentle whispers. These were not ordinary women, but queens, mothers, souls caught between duty and dreams. Tonight, as we settle into the peaceful embrace of evening, let us journey together through the lives of 8 remarkable queens, whose bodies became vessels of empire, whose wombs carried the weight of dynasties, and whose hearts beat with the complex rhythms of love, loss, and endless devotion. The candlelight flickers softly as we begin our tale, casting gentle shadows that seem to beckon us into a world where royal blood meant more than privilege. It meant sacrifice. In palaces across Europe, from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sun-drenched courts of Spain, these queens lived lives that were both extraordinary and heartbreakingly human. Their stories unfold like silk ribbons in the wind, each thread woven with moments of joy, sorrow, hope, and the endless cycle of new life. Close your eyes and imagine, if you will, the soft rustle of heavy brocade gowns, the gentle creaking of wooden cradles, the hushed conversations of midwives in candlelit chambers. This is where our story begins, in the intimate spaces where queens became mothers again and again, their lives measured not in seasons or years, but in the rhythm of pregnancy and birth, nursing and weaning, loving and letting go. Our first queen emerges from the mists of time like a figure from a dream. Maria Theresa of Austria, known to history as the mother of 16 children, ruled an empire while her body served as the foundation of European diplomacy. Born in 1717, she inherited a throne that few believed a woman could hold, yet she gripped it with hands that also cradled infant after infant. Her marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine was arranged for political advantage, but it blossomed into something deeper, something that would see her pregnant almost continuously for 20 years. Picture her in the early morning hours, before the court awakens, standing by a frost-covered window in the Hofburg Palace. Her hand rests gently on her growing belly, perhaps for the 10th time, perhaps the 12th. The weight of an empire presses down upon her shoulders, yet within her, new life stirs with the promise of tomorrow. She whispers softly to the child within, words that history will never record, but that echo with the tenderness of all mothers throughout time. Maria Theresa's pregnancies came in waves, like tides that shaped the shores of her life. In 1737, she gave birth to her first daughter, Maria Elizabeth. The joy was profound, yet tinged with the knowledge that this was only the beginning. By 1740, when her father died, and she ascended to the throne, she was already pregnant with her second child. The courtiers whispered among themselves, wondering how a pregnant woman could possibly defend her inheritance against the ambitious kings of Europe. But defend it she did, even as her body swelled with new life. During the War of Austrian Succession, she appeared before the Hungarian Diet, 6 months pregnant, her voice strong and clear as she pleaded for support. The Hungarian nobles, moved by her courage and her condition, drew their swords and pledged their lives to her cause. It was a moment that would be remembered for centuries, when motherhood and monarchy fused into something transcendent and powerful. The children came steadily, like seasons in an endless year. Maria Anna in 1738, Maria Christina in 1742, Maria Amalia Elizabeth again in 1743, Maria Amalia in 1746. Each name carries with it the weight of hope and expectation, each birth a small miracle wrapped in the larger tapestry of empire. Maria Theresa nursed some of her children herself, a practice considered unusual for queens of her era, but she insisted on these precious moments of intimacy, amidst the endless demands of statecraft. In the quiet hours after giving birth, when the palace settled into peaceful slumber, Maria Theresa would often walk the corridors alone, her steps soft on the marble floors. These were her moments of reflection, when she could simply be a woman who had brought new life into the world, before dawn brought with it the responsibilities of ruling millions. She would pause at the nursery doors, listening to the gentle breathing of her sleeping children, and in those moments the weight of the crown seemed both lighter and heavier than ever before. Her pregnancies were not without their challenge. The royal physicians, with their limited knowledge and crude instruments, could offer little beyond prayers and bloodletting. Each labor was a journey into the unknown, dance between life and death played out in silk-draped chambers while the empire held its breath. Yet Maria Theresa endured, her strength becoming legendary among her subjects, who saw in her the embodiment of maternal devotion and royal duty intertwined. The political implications of each pregnancy rippled across Europe like stones cast into still water. Diplomats calculated the value of each potential alliance, each new child representing a possible marriage treaty, a strategic advantage, a piece on the great chessboard of European politics. Yet for Maria Theresa, each pregnancy was intensely personal, a transformation of her body and soul that transcended the coldly strategic calculations of her advisors. Leopold, born in 1747, would become Holy Roman Emperor. Maria Carolina, born in 1748, would become Queen of Naples and Sicily. Maria Johanna, born in 1750, would die young, a reminder that even queens cannot shield their children from life's sorrows. Each birth brought joy and anxiety in equal measure. Love and loss intermingled like light and shadow in a master painter's canvas. As the years passed, Maria Theresa's body bore the marks of her endless maternal journey. Her figure, once slender and graceful, became fuller, more maternal, shaped by the children she had carried. Her ladies-in-waiting would dress her with extra care, understanding that each gown must accommodate not just a queen but a woman, whose body had served as the vessel for an empire's future. Her portraits from this period show a woman of dignity and strength, but also one whose eyes held the deep wisdom that comes from intimate knowledge of life's most profound mysteries. The spacing between her children tells its own story of devotion and duty. Rarely more than 2 years apart, sometimes less than 18 months, her pregnancies followed one another like chapters in an endless book. Marie Antoinette, her youngest daughter, was born in 1755, when Maria Theresa was 38 years old and had already given birth to 15 times. By then, the rhythm of pregnancy and birth had become as natural to her as breathing. Yet each child remained a miracle, a gift, a responsibility that would shape the future of Europe. Our second queen steps forward from the shadows of Scottish history like a figure from a Highland ballad. Margaret Tudor, Queen of Scotland, daughter of Henry VII of England, lived a life that spanned the tumultuous early years of the 16th century. Born in 1489, she was married at 13 to James IV of Scotland, a union designed to bring peace between the warring nations of England and Scotland. But peace, as Margaret would learn, was far more elusive than pregnancy. The Scottish court was rougher than the English palaces of her childhood, the castle walls thicker, the winters longer, and more brutal. Yet Margaret adapted with the resilience that would characterize her entire life, her womb becoming a bridge between two kingdoms, even as her heart learned to love the wild beauty of her adopted homeland. Her first pregnancy came quickly after her marriage, a source of joy and hope for the still fragile peace between England and Scotland. James, her first son, was born in 1507, and the celebrations echoed through Edinburgh and beyond. Here was the heir who might unite the crowns, the child whose existence justified the political marriage, and promised a future free from the endless border wars that had plagued both nations. Margaret held her son close, knowing that his small body carried the dreams of two kingdoms, even as she marveled at his tiny fingers and the way he grasped her thumb with surprising strength. But tragedy stalked the Scottish court like a Highland myth. Young James died in infancy, his brief life a reminder of how fragile royal hopes could be. Margaret's grief was profound, her body still recovering from childbirth, even as her heart broke for the son she would never see grow to manhood. Yet duty called, and duty for a queen meant trying again, hoping again, trusting her body once more to carry the future of Scotland within her womb. Arthur, Duke of Rothesay, was born in 1509, and again the kingdom rejoiced. This son lived longer, long enough for Margaret to imagine his future, to plan for his education, to dream of the man he might become. She would spend hours in the nursery, reading to him in both English and the Scots dialect she was learning, her voice soft and melodic in the peaceful chambers high above the castle courtyard. These were precious moments, stolen from the demands of queenship, when she could simply be a mother delighting in her child. But Arthur too was claimed by death, passing away in 1510 at just over a year old. The pattern was becoming heartbreakingly clear. Margaret's body was well and able to conceive and carry children, but Scotland seemed unable to nurture them to adulthood. Her grief during this period was documented by contemporary observers, who noted how the young queen would often be found in the castle chapel, her head bowed in prayer, her hands folded over her flat belly as if trying to will new life into existence. The political pressure was immense. A kingdom without a clear heir was a kingdom vulnerable to civil war and foreign invasion. Margaret understood this intellectually, but emotionally, each lost pregnancy, each infant death, each failed hope carved deeper wounds in her heart. Her ladies-in-waiting would find her sometimes standing at the castle walls, looking out over the Scottish landscape, her expression a mixture of determination and deep sadness. When she became pregnant again in 1511, the entire court held its breath. This time, surely, this time the child would live. This time, Scotland would have its heir and Margaret would have the living son her heart craved so desperately. The pregnancy progressed normally, the royal physicians cautiously optimistic, the kingdom preparing once again for celebration. But this child too was lost, either stillborn or dying shortly after birth. Another small grave in the royal cemetery, another wound in Margaret's increasingly fragile heart. The Battle of Flodden in 1513 changed everything. James III, Margaret's husband, died on that bloody field along with much of Scotland's nobility, leaving behind a widow and a 17-month-old son who would become James. Suddenly Margaret was not just a queen but a queen regent, her womb no longer just the hope of Scotland, but its most precious protection. The infant James III was all that stood between Scotland and chaos, his small life the thread upon which a kingdom's independence hung. Margaret's subsequent marriages and pregnancies took on even greater complexity. Her marriage to Archibald Douglas, Earl of Angus, in 1514 caused a political scandal but also brought more children. Margaret Douglas, born in 1515, would grow up to become a significant figure in her own right, her life shaped by the tumultuous politics of Tudor England. Each of Margaret's pregnancies now carried not just personal hope, but political calculation, each child a potential pawn in the great game of 16th-century politics. The years that followed saw Margaret navigate pregnancy and politics with equal skill and determination. Her body continued to conceive, to carry, to give birth, even as her mind worked constantly to protect her children and secure her position. She understood, perhaps better than any queen of her generation, how intimately connected were the personal and the political, how a woman's womb could be both her greatest power and her greatest vulnerability. Her later pregnancies, including those during her third marriage to Henry Stuart, Lord Methven, showed a woman who had learned to balance maternal love with political necessity. She had learned that being a mother meant not just giving birth, but fighting for her children's survival and advancement in a world that saw them primarily as tools of diplomacy. Her correspondence from this period reveals a woman of remarkable strength and intelligence, someone who had transformed the grief of lost children into wisdom and the joy of living children into fierce determination. From the rolling hills of Scotland, our journey takes us to the sun-drenched palaces of Spain, where Isabella of Castile awaits our attention like a Madonna in a Renaissance painting. Born in 1451, Isabella would become one of the most powerful queens in European history, yet her path to power was paved with pregnancies, her reign secured as much by her fertility as by her intelligence and determination. Her marriage to Ferdinand of Aragon in 1469 was a love match that also happened to unite the crowns of Castile and Aragon, creating the foundation of modern Spain. The early years of their marriage were a time of constant warfare and constant pregnancy. Isabella's body served dual purposes, creating heirs to secure their disputed throne and providing the physical strength needed to campaign alongside her husband as they fought to consolidate their power. Contemporary accounts describe her as a woman of extraordinary energy, capable of reviewing battle plans in the morning and attending to the needs of her growing children in the evening, all while carrying yet another child in her womb. Her first child, Isabella was born in 1470, during one of the most turbulent periods of the Castilian succession crisis. The kingdom was torn apart by civil war, nobles switching sides with bewildering frequency, and the future of Spain hanging in the balance. Yet in the midst of this chaos, Isabella found moments of profound peace in her role as a mother. She insisted on nursing her daughter herself when possible, believing that a queen who could not nurture her own children had no right to rule a kingdom. The Infanta Isabella grew up in military camps as much as in palaces, her childhood shaped by the rhythm of campaign seasons and her mother's pregnancies. By the age of 5, she had witnessed more political intrigue than most adults, yet her mother's constant presence provided stability and love amidst the chaos. Isabella of Castile understood that raising future queens and kings required more than just providing them with tutors and governesses. It required showing them through example how to balance power with compassion, duty with love. John, the long-awaited heir, was born in 1478, and his birth was celebrated throughout Spain with festivals that lasted for weeks. Here, finally, was the prince who would inherit the United Kingdoms, who would continue the dynasty that Isabella and Ferdinand were building. The queen's joy was profound and visible. Contemporary chronicles describe her as radiant during the months following John's birth, her happiness infectious and her energy seemingly boundless, despite the physical toll of 8 years of almost continuous pregnancy and childbirth. But Isabella's pregnancies were about more than just producing heirs. Each child represented a potential alliance, a future marriage that could secure Spain's position in the complex web of European politics. When Joanna was born in 1479, Isabella was already calculating which European prince might make the most advantageous husband for her daughter. When Maria was born in 1482, the same calculations began anew. This was the reality of royal motherhood. Love and politics intertwined so completely that it was impossible to separate them. The spacing of Isabella's children tells the story of a woman who understood her role as both queen and mother, with crystalline clarity. Each pregnancy was timed as much as such things could be, to maximize political advantage while minimizing personal risk. The gaps between children allowed her body to recover while also allowing her to focus on the complex negotiations that would determine her children's future. She was a master of timing, understanding that in royal life, when a child was born could be as important as the fact that they were born at all. Catherine, her youngest daughter, was born in 1485, the same year that saw the completion of the Reconquista, with the fall of Granada. The symbolism was not lost on Isabella or her subjects. As the last Muslim stronghold in Spain fell, a new Christian princess entered the world, the future stretching out before both kingdom and child with infinite possibility. Catherine would eventually become Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, her own story of marriage, pregnancy, and heartbreak echoing her mother's in ways that neither could have foreseen. The physical toll of 5 pregnancies in 15 years was significant, but Isabella bore it with the stoicism that characterized all aspects of her life. Her physicians noted that she recovered from childbirth with remarkable speed, often resuming her royal duties within weeks of giving birth. This was not unusual for queens of the period, but Isabella's energy and resilience were exceptional even by royal standards. She seemed to draw strength from motherhood rather than being depleted by it. Her approach to child-rearing was hands-on in a way that was unusual for royalty. She personally oversaw her children's education, ensuring that her daughters received the same rigorous academic training as her son. She believed that royal children, regardless of gender, needed to understand statecraft, languages, history, and theology. Her own pregnancies had taught her that a queen's body might serve the dynasty, but a queen's mind must serve the realm, and she was determined to raise children who understood both lessons. The tragic early death of Prince John in 1497 devastated Isabella in ways that surprised even those who knew her best. Here was a woman who had faced down rebellious nobles, conquered kingdoms, and expelled entire populations. Yet the loss of her 19-year-old son reduced her to profound grief that she never fully overcame. She had given her body to create this heir, had shaped her entire reign around ensuring his succession, and his death felt like a repudiation of everything she had sacrificed. Yet even in her grief, Isabella's understanding of dynastic responsibility never wavered. With John's death, the succession passed to her daughter Isabella, and then after her death to Joanna. Each transition required delicate political maneuvering, each change in the succession altering the balance of European power. Isabella's body had created these possibilities through pregnancy and birth. Now her mind had to navigate the consequences of mortality and chance. Her final years were marked by the complex emotions of a mother watching her children navigate the treacherous waters of royal marriage and responsibility. Catherine's troubled marriage to Henry VIII of England was a source of constant worry. Joanna's mental instability a heartbreak that Isabella carried with her to the grave. She had given everything she could give, her body, her mind, her heart, to secure her dynasty. Yet she understood that ultimately, each child must face their destiny alone. From the Spanish sun we travel north to the fog-shrouded court of Anne of Austria, Queen of France, wife to Louis XIII, and mother to the future Louis V. Born in 1601, Anne's life was shaped from the beginning by the expectation of pregnancy and the reality of loss. Her story unfolding in the gilded halls of Versailles like a tragic opera performed in whispers and shadow. Her marriage to Louis XIII in 1615 was arranged when she was just 14, a political alliance designed to strengthen the bonds between France and Spain. The early years of Anne's marriage were marked by a heartbreaking pattern of conception, hope, and loss that would define much of her adult life. Her first documented pregnancy came in 1619 when she was 18 years old, and the French court buzzed with excitement at the prospect of an heir to the throne. But this pregnancy ended in miscarriage, the first of many such losses that would earn Anne a reputation as an unlucky queen, a woman whose womb could not secure the dynasty despite her royal blood. The pressure on Anne was immense and unrelenting. Every month that passed without pregnancy was noted by courtiers and diplomats alike. Every miscarriage analyzed by physicians who understood little about the female body but felt compelled to offer explanations and remedy. Anne endured countless examinations, treatments, and interventions, her body becoming a public concern as much as a private one. The most intimate aspects of her marriage were discussed in council chambers and diplomatic dispatches. Her fertility or lack thereof, a matter of international interest. Between 1619 and 1638, Anne experienced at least 4 documented miscarriages and possibly several more that were kept secret from the court. Each loss was devastating not just personally but politically, as the lack of an heir made the French monarchy vulnerable to succession disputes and foreign intervention. Anne's rooms in the Louvre became places of constant hope and recurring disappointment. Her ladies-in-waiting learning to read the signs of her moods, knowing when to offer comfort and when to remain silent. The relationship between Anne and her husband was complicated by the pressure to produce children. Louis XIII was a complex man, possibly struggling with his own sexuality, certainly struggling with the expectations of kingship. Their marriage was formal and distant for many years, making conception difficult and placing additional strain on Anne's already fragile emotional state. She found solace in her faith, spending hours in prayer begging God for the child that seemed to constantly elude her grasp. Her pregnancies, when they did occur, were events of national importance. The court physicians would attend her constantly, monitoring every aspect of her health, prescribing treatments that ranged from the reasonable to the bizarre. She was bled regularly, fed special diets, required to maintain particular postures and avoid certain activities. Her body, already under enormous stress from the repeated losses, was subjected to medical interventions that probably did more harm than good. The Spanish influence in Anne's life added another layer of complexity to her reproductive struggles. As a Spanish princess married to the French king, her loyalty was constantly questioned, her correspondence monitored, her every action interpreted through the lens of international politics. When her pregnancies failed, some whispered that it was God's punishment for the unnatural alliance between France and Spain, while others suggested that she was deliberately preventing conception to sabotage the French dynasty. The court ladies who surrounded Anne became intimate witnesses to her monthly cycles of hope and despair. They learned to recognize the signs of early pregnancy, to provide comfort during miscarriages, to maintain the careful balance between optimism and realism that royal life demanded. These women, many of them mothers, misunderstood the profound loneliness of Anne's situation, the way that royal pregnancy transformed a deeply personal experience into a public performance. Anne's faith sustained her through the darkest periods of her reproductive struggles. She made pilgrimages to shrines associated with fertility, commissioned prayers and masses for the intention of conception, and surrounded herself with religious advisors who assured her that God's timing was perfect, even when human timing seemed disastrously flawed. Her devotion during this period was noted by contemporary observers, who remarked on the depth of her piety and the way she seemed to find peace in prayer, even when peace eluded her in every other aspect of her life. The miracle of Louis XIV's birth in 1638, after 23 years of marriage and countless failed pregnancies, was celebrated as a divine intervention. Anne was 37 years old, an age considered quite advanced for childbearing in the 17th century, and the successful pregnancy was seen as proof of God's favor toward the French monarchy. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the greatest physicians in France and witnessed by enough courtiers to ensure that there could be no question about the child's legitimacy. The joy that followed Louis XIV's birth was profound and transformative for Anne. After decades of disappointment and loss, she finally held a living son, an heir to the French throne, proof that her body could indeed fulfill its royal purpose. The relief was visible in her face, chroniclers noted, a serenity and happiness that had been absent for years. She insisted on nursing the future Sun King herself, a decision that scandalized some courtiers, but revealed the depth of her maternal love and her determination to be intimately involved in her son's early life. Philippe, born in 1640 when Anne was 39, completed her family and secured the dynasty. His birth was less dramatic than his brother's, but no less welcome, representing both a backup heir and proof that Louis XIV's birth had not been a singular miracle, but evidence of Anne's restored fertility. The two boys would grow up in the shadow of their mother's long struggle to conceive them, their childhood marked by her intense devotion and her determination to protect them from the political intrigues that had made her own life so difficult. Anne's later life was shaped by the knowledge that she had finally succeeded in her primary royal duty, that her body had ultimately served the dynasty as required. But the cost of that success, the years of loss, the public scrutiny, the private grief, had left marks that never fully healed. She remained protective of her sons, to a degree that sometimes concerned her advisors, understanding perhaps better than anyone how fragile royal life could be, how quickly hope could turn to heartbreak. Her relationships with her daughters-in-law would later reflect her own experiences with royal pregnancy. She was sympathetic to their struggles, understanding in ways that only someone who had endured similar pressures could be. Yet she was also demanding, expecting them to understand that royal motherhood was both a privilege and a burden, that their bodies belonged not just to themselves but to the dynasty and the nation. The story of Anne of Austria reminds us that royal pregnancy was never just about the physical act of conceiving and bearing children, but about the emotional, psychological, and spiritual journey that accompanied each attempt to secure a dynasty. Her life illustrates the profound loneliness that could accompany royal motherhood, the way that the most intimate experiences of a woman's life could become public property, subject to scrutiny, analysis, and judgment by people who had never walked in her shoes. Now we turn our attention to Catherine de' Medici, whose name echoes through history like a whispered prayer in the chapel of Fontainebleau. Born in Florence in 1519, she came to France as a 14-year-old bride, carrying with her the expectations of two powerful families and the weight of dynastic ambition that would shape her life in ways she could never have imagined. Her marriage to Henry II of France was arranged to cement an alliance between France and the powerful Medici banking family, but it would become something far more complex and consequential. Catherine's early years in France were marked by a painful fertility struggle that would have broken a lesser woman. For the first 10 years of her marriage, she remained childless, a source of shame and political vulnerability that threatened not just her position as queen but the entire Franco-Medici alliance. The French court, never known for its kindness to foreign queens, whispered about her failure to produce an heir, some suggesting that she should be set aside in favor of a more fertile wife. The medical interventions that Catherine endured during this period were as bizarre as they were painful. Court physicians subjected her to examinations, treatments, and procedures that reflected the primitive understanding of female reproduction in the 16th century. She drank concoctions made from ground pearls and unicorn horn, wore amulets blessed by various saints, and submitted to internal examinations that were both humiliating and medically useless. Yet she endured it all with the stoicism that would characterize her entire life. Her husband's relationship with Diane de Poitiers added another layer of complexity to Catherine's reproductive struggles. Henry II made no secret of his devotion to his older mistress, and the court understood that Diane held more influence over the king than his wife. Yet Catherine maintained her dignity throughout this humiliation, understanding that her position depended not on her husband's love, but on her ability to produce children. She treated Diane with careful courtesy, recognizing that antagonizing the king's mistress would only worsen her already precarious situation. The breakthrough came in 1544 when Catherine finally conceived and gave birth to Francis, the future Francis VI. The relief and joy throughout the French court was palpable, and Catherine herself was transformed by motherhood in ways that surprised even those who knew her well. She had spent 10 years learning to be a queen. Now she had to learn to be a mother, and she approached this new role with the same intelligence and determination that had sustained her through her childless years. But Francis was just the beginning. Once Catherine's body learned the rhythm of pregnancy and birth, she embraced it with an intensity that reflected both personal joy and political calculation. Charles, born in 1550, would become Charles Nonstop. Claude, born in 1547, would marry the Duke of Lorraine. Between 1544 and 1556, Catherine was almost continuously pregnant, her body serving as the foundation of Valois dynastic power, even as her mind worked constantly to navigate the complex politics of the French court. Elizabeth, born in 1545, would become Queen of Spain through marriage to Philip II, creating a crucial alliance that would shape European politics for decades. Her birth was celebrated not just as the arrival of another royal child, but as the creation of a future diplomatic asset, her small body already carrying the weight of international expectation. Catherine understood this reality from the moment of her daughter's birth, loving her fiercely while also calculating her potential value in the marriage market. The rapid succession of pregnancies took its toll on Catherine's body, but she bore it without complaint, understanding that each child strengthened her position and secured the dynasty. Her pregnancies became a source of pride rather than anxiety, proof of her value as a queen and a woman. The courtiers who had once whispered about her barrenness now spoke admiringly of her fertility. The same people who had questioned her worthiness now celebrating her as the mother of the future of France. Margaret, born in 1553, would grow up to become one of the most fascinating women of her generation, her beauty and intelligence making her a valuable asset in Catherine's political calculations. Henry, born in 1551, would eventually become Henry III, the last of the Valois kings. Each child represented not just a personal triumph for Catherine but a strategic advantage for the monarchy, their small lives already part of elaborate plans for marriages, alliances and political arrangements. The nurseries at Fontainebleau became Catherine's domain in ways that the formal reception rooms never quite did. Here, surrounded by wet nurses, governesses and the sounds of children at play, she found a peace and purpose that had eluded her during her childless years. She insisted on being involved in every aspect of her children's upbringing, from their education to their daily routines, understanding that raising future kings and queens was perhaps the most important work she would ever do. Francis and Hercule, born in 1555 and 1554 respectively, completed Catherine's family and demonstrated the remarkable transformation of a woman who had once been dismissed as barren. Hercule, later called Francis after his older brother's death, would become Duke of Anjou and play a crucial role in the religious wars that would tear France apart. Each of Catherine's children would face challenges that she could never have anticipated when she held them as infants. their lives shaped by forces beyond even her considerable political skill. The tragedy that marked Catherine's later life was foreshadowed by the difficulties of her early pregnancies. Several of her children would die young, victims of disease, political violence, or the simple fragility of life in the 16th century. Yet the woman who had learned patience during her 10 years of childlessness was prepared for these losses in ways that other mothers might not have been. She had learned that royal motherhood meant loving fiercely while holding lightly, cherishing each moment while preparing for inevitable loss. Catherine's influence over her children was profound and lasting, shaped by her memories of her own struggle to conceive them. She was protective to a degree that sometimes concerned her advisors, yet she was also practical, understanding that royal children must be prepared for the realities of political life from an early age. Her sons would all become kings of France, yet none would achieve the greatness she had hoped for them, a reminder that even the most devoted mother cannot control the forces of history. The irony of Catherine's life was that the woman who had been dismissed as barren became one of the most fertile queens in French history, her body ultimately producing the very heirs that had seemed so impossible in her youth. Yet her story also illustrates the profound loneliness that could accompany even successful royal motherhood, the way that public triumph could coexist with private sorrow, the complexity of loving children who belonged as much to history as to their mother. Her final years were spent watching her surviving children navigate the treacherous waters of French politics during the religious wars, her maternal heart breaking as she witnessed the violence and instability that threatened everything she had worked to build. She had given her body to create the Valois dynasty, had shaped her entire life around ensuring its continuation, yet she lived to see it torn apart by forces beyond her control. From the Renaissance splendor of France, our journey takes us to the court of Empress Maria Theresa's contemporary and rival Catherine II of Russia, known to history as Catherine the Great. Born Sophie Friederike Auguste in 1729, she came to Russia as a teenage bride, carrying with her ambitions that extended far beyond the traditional role of royal wife and mother. Yet even this remarkable woman, who would transform an empire and redefine the very concept of female rule, could not escape the fundamental reality of royal life. Her body belonged to the dynasty as much as her mind belonged to statecraft. Catherine's path to motherhood was complicated from the beginning by the peculiarities of her marriage to the future Peter III, a man who was perhaps even less suited to marriage than he was to rule it. Their relationship was troubled from the start, marked by Peter's immaturity and mental instability, and Catherine's growing awareness that she had married not just a difficult man but a dangerous one. Yet duty demanded children, and Catherine approached even this challenge with the intelligence and determination that characterized everything she did. Paul, born in 1754, was Catherine's first and most important child from a dynastic perspective, the heir who would justify her position and secure the succession. Yet his paternity was questioned from the moment of his birth, court gossips whispering that his true father was not Peter III, but one of Catherine's lovers. Catherine never confirmed or denied these rumors, understanding that uncertainty could sometimes serve her political purposes better than clarity. What mattered was that Paul existed, that the succession was secure, and that her body had fulfilled its most basic royal function. The birth of Paul marked a turning point in Catherine's life, transforming her from a foreign princess of uncertain standing into the mother of the future emperor of Russia. The experience of pregnancy and childbirth in the Russian court was different from what she had known in Germany, marked by orthodox ceremonies and traditions that were still foreign to her Lutheran upbringing. Yet she adapted with characteristic grace, understanding that motherhood would give her a power and legitimacy that no amount of political maneuvering could provide. Anna, born in 1757, lived only 15 months. Her brief life, a reminder of the fragility that haunted all royal families. Catherine's grief at her daughter's death was profound but private, expressed in her letters and journals rather than in public displays of emotion. She had learned early that royal mothers must mourn quietly, that excessive displays of maternal grief could be interpreted as weakness or instability. Yet those who knew her well noted the changes in her during this period, a new depth of understanding about the costs of power and the vulnerability that accompanied love. Alexei, born in 1762, would be her last child, arriving at a time when Catherine's position was more secure, but her marriage more troubled than ever. By this time, she had already begun the careful planning that would lead to her husband's deposition and her own assumption of absolute power. The birth of Alexei represented not just another child but another potential challenge to her plans, another person whose existence would complicate the already complex calculations of succession and legitimacy. Catherine's approach to motherhood was shaped by her understanding that royal children were political assets, as much as objects of maternal love. She maintained careful control over her children's upbringing, ensuring that they received the education and training appropriate to their eventual roles while also protecting them from the more dangerous aspects of court life. Her relationship with Paul was particularly complex, marked by love and manipulation in equal measure. As she recognized that he would eventually inherit the throne, she was reshaped. The Empress's later relationships and possible additional pregnancies remained subjects of speculation and rumor throughout her reign. Some historians suggest that she had other children by her various lovers, children who were quietly placed in noble families and raised away from court. These whispered stories, whether true or false, speak to the reality that even an empress as powerful as Catherine could not entirely escape the biological consequences of her personal relationship. Her correspondence reveals a woman who thought deeply about the relationship between motherhood and power, understanding that her children were both her greatest vulnerability and her strongest claim to legitimacy. She wrote extensively about the challenges of raising royal children, the difficulty of balancing maternal love with political necessity, the constant awareness that her children's lives would be shaped by forces beyond her control. These private thoughts, recorded in letters to trusted friends, reveal a complexity to Catherine's maternal experience that her public image as the all-powerful empress often obscured. The nurseries in the Winter Palace became spaces where Catherine could temporarily set aside the burdens of empire and simply be a mother. Though even these private moments were shaped by the realities of absolute rule, she insisted on being involved in her children's education, personally selecting their tutors and monitoring their progress. Yet she also understood that royal children must learn early to subordinate personal desires to political necessity, a lesson that her own life had taught her repeatedly. Catherine's relationship with her son Paul grew increasingly complex as he matured, shaped by her knowledge that he would eventually inherit the throne, and her determination to ensure that he was prepared for its burden. She loved him fiercely yet manipulated him politically, protected him from some dangers while exposing him to others that she deemed necessary for his education. This delicate balance between maternal love and imperial calculation characterized all her relationships with her children. The Empress's understanding of pregnancy and motherhood was also shaped by her awareness of how these experiences had changed her. She wrote about the physical transformation that pregnancy brought, not just to her body but to her understanding of her own mortality and vulnerability. These insights influenced her policies regarding women and families throughout her reign, making her more sensitive to the challenges faced by mothers across her empire. Her final years were spent watching her son Paul struggle with the burden she had prepared him to carry, knowing that her own legacy would be judged in part by his success or failure as emperor. She had given her body to create the continuation of the dynasty, had shaped her maternal relationships around political calculation. Yet in the end she could not control the man her son became or the choices he would make as ruler. From the glittering court of St. Petersburg, we journey west to Habsburg Vienna, where Empress Maria Theresa's contemporary, Maria Carolina of Naples and Sicily, lived a life that embodied the complex intersection of motherhood and monarchy in 18th century Europe. Born in 1752 as the daughter of Maria Theresa, she inherited not just her mother's political acumen, but her understanding that royal wombs were instruments of statecraft, as much as vessels of maternal love. Maria Carolina's marriage to Ferdinand IV of Naples in 1768 was arranged as part of her mother's grand strategy for European alliances. But it became something more personal than political calculation might have predicted. Unlike many royal marriages of the period, Maria Carolina and Ferdinand developed a genuine affection for each other that translated into both political partnership and prolific reproduction. Their court in Naples became known for its warmth and informality, a stark contrast to the rigid protocols of Vienna or Versailles. The Italian sun seemed to suit Maria Carolina's fertility as much as her temperament. Her first pregnancy came quickly after her marriage, and Maria Theresa Cristina, born in 1770, was welcomed as proof that the young queen had successfully adapted to her new role. The birth was celebrated throughout the kingdom, but for Maria Carolina it represented something more profound, the beginning of a maternal journey that would define the next 2 decades of her life. Francis, born in 1777, was the first son and heir, his arrival marking Maria Carolina's full acceptance by the Neapolitan nobility and people. She had learned from her mother's example the importance of producing male heirs, yet she also understood that daughters were valuable assets in the complex game of European marriage alliances. Each pregnancy was thus both a personal experience and a political event, her growing belly a source of speculation and celebration throughout the kingdom. The queen's pregnancies came with remarkable regularity, her body settling into a rhythm of conception, gestation and birth that seemed as natural as the changing season. Maria Anna, born in 1775, Maria Clementina in 1777, Maria Cristina in 1779, each daughter, adding to the royal nursery and expanding the possibilities for future diplomatic marriages. Maria Carolina approached each pregnancy with the same energy and intelligence she brought to statecraft, understanding that successful motherhood required planning, patience, and political awareness. Her relationship with pregnancy was remarkably positive compared to many of her royal contemporaries. Perhaps because of her mother's example, perhaps because of her own resilient nature, Maria Carolina seemed to thrive during her pregnancies, maintaining an active schedule of court duties and political involvement, even in her final months. Contemporary observers noted her energy and good humor during these periods, her ability to balance the physical demands of pregnancy with the intellectual challenges of governing alongside her husband. The nurseries in the royal palace of Naples reflected Maria Carolina's hands-on approach to motherhood. Unlike some queens who delegated child-rearing entirely to wet nurses and governesses, she insisted on being intimately involved in her children's daily lives. She nursed several of her children herself, a decision that raised eyebrows among traditionalists, but reflected her belief that royal mothers should be mothers first, queens second, at least in the privacy of the nursery. Leopold, born in 1790, came at a time when the revolutionary winds from France were beginning to shake the foundations of European monarchy. His birth was both a celebration and a worry, as Maria Carolina understood that the world her children would inherit would be vastly different from the one she had known. The French Revolution had particular resonance for her, as her sister Marie Antoinette was facing the growing hostility of the French people. A reminder that royal birth offered no guarantee of safety or happiness. The Queen's correspondence during this period reveals a woman grappling with the fundamental questions of royal motherhood in an age of revolution. She wrote extensively about her fears for her children's future, her determination to prepare them for a world where traditional royal prerogatives could no longer be taken for granted. Each pregnancy now carried additional weight, not just dynastic but existential, as she wondered what kind of world she was bringing her children into. Francesco, born in 1792, arrived in the midst of the revolutionary terror that would claim Marie Antoinette's life. Maria Carolina's grief for her sister was compounded by her anxiety about her own children's safety, her understanding that the violence in France could easily spread to other monarchies. Her pregnancy with Francesco was thus marked by a tension between maternal hope and political fear, the joy of new life shadowed by the reality of revolutionary violence. Her later pregnancies, including those that produced Leopoldo in 1790 and Alberto in 1792, were shaped by her growing understanding that royal motherhood in the age of revolution required new strategies and approaches. She began to emphasize her children's education in ways that went beyond traditional royal training, understanding that they might need to navigate a world where birth and breeding alone would not be sufficient for survival. The physical toll of 18 pregnancies over more than 20 years was significant, yet Maria Carolina bore it with remarkable grace and energy. Court physicians noted her quick recoveries and continued vitality, attributing her resilience to her active lifestyle and positive attitude. She seemed to understand intuitively that pregnancy and motherhood, rather than limiting her political effectiveness, actually enhanced it by demonstrating her commitment to the dynasty and her ability to balance multiple demanding roles. Her relationships with her children were marked by the same warmth and intelligence that characterized all her personal relationships. She was affectionate without being indulgent, protective without being overprotective, understanding that royal children needed both love and preparation for the realities of their future roles. Her letters to and about her children reveal a mother who took genuine delight in their personalities and achievements, while never losing sight of their political importance. The tragedy that marked the later years of Maria Carolina's life was foreshadowed by the inherent fragility of 18th-century childhood. Several of her children died young, victims of diseases that would be easily treatable today, but were often fatal in her era. Each loss was devastating, yet she bore these griefs with the stoicism that royal mothers were expected to display, understanding that excessive mourning could be interpreted as a lack of faith in divine providence. Her influence on European politics extended far beyond her role as Queen of Naples, shaped in large part by the network of relationships created through her children's marriages. She understood that her daughters and sons were her most powerful diplomatic assets, their marriages creating webs of alliance and obligation that could protect the kingdom and advance its interests. This calculating approach to her children's futures was balanced by genuine maternal love, creating relationships that were complex but ultimately sustaining. The final chapter of Maria Carolina's reproductive life came as she entered her 40s, her body finally slowing its remarkable cycle of pregnancy and birth. Her youngest children were born into a world transformed by revolution and war, their childhood shadowed by the exile and uncertainty that would mark their parents' final years. Yet even in exile, Maria Carolina remained focused on her children's welfare and preparation for an uncertain future. Our penultimate queen emerges from the shadows of medieval England, like a figure from an illuminated manuscript. Eleanor of Aquitaine, born around 1122, lived a life that spanned nearly the entire 12th century and included 2 marriages, 2 kingdoms, and countless pregnancies that shaped the political landscape of medieval Europe. Her story reminds us that royal pregnancy has been a tool of statecraft for as long as there have been kingdoms to inherit and dynasties to secure. Eleanor's first marriage, to Louis VII of France, began when she was barely 15 years old, her fertile young body already recognized as one of the most valuable political assets in Europe. The Duchy of Aquitaine, which she brought to the marriage, was larger and richer than the French royal domain itself, making her simultaneously the most desirable and most powerful woman of her generation. Yet, despite her political importance, the fundamental expectation remained the same as for any royal bride. She must produce heirs to secure the succession. Marie, born in 1145, was Eleanor's first child and a source of both joy and disappointment to the French court. While any healthy child was cause for celebration, the kingdom needed male heirs, and Eleanor's failure to produce a son became a source of increasing tension in her marriage to Louis. Contemporary chroniclers noted the pressure placed on the young queen, the way that every month without pregnancy was seen as a failure, every miscarriage as evidence of divine displeasure. The medical understanding of fertility in the 12th century was primitive, even by the standards of later medieval periods. Eleanor was subjected to treatments that ranged from the merely useless to the actively harmful, bloodletting, herbal concoctions, pilgrimages to shrines associated with fertility, and examinations by physicians whose knowledge was based more on classical texts than empirical observation. Yet she endured it all with the dignity and strength that would characterize her entire extraordinary life. Alex, born in 1150, was Eleanor's second daughter with Louis, and while she was welcomed with love, her birth only intensified the pressure for a male heir. The French nobles were growing restless about the succession, and whispers began to circulate about the possibility of annulment if Eleanor could not produce a son. These conversations took place around her, about her, as if she were a broodmare whose value was determined solely by her reproductive capacity. The failure to produce male heirs with Louis VII led directly to the annulment of their marriage in 1152, But Eleanor's story was far from over. Within months of her divorce, she married Henry Plantagenet, Duke of Normandy and Count of Anjou, a man 11 years her junior who would soon become Henry II of England. This marriage would prove far more fertile and far more consequential than her first, transforming Eleanor from a disappointed French queen into the mother of the Plantagenet dynasty. William, born in 1153, was Eleanor's first son and the child who proved that her earlier inability to produce male heirs had been circumstantial rather than inherent. The joy throughout Henry's territories was immense, as was Eleanor's personal relief at finally fulfilling the most basic expectation of royal marriage. Yet William's death in 1156 at the age of 3 was a devastating reminder of the fragility of medieval childhood and the constant anxiety that accompanied royal motherhood. Henry the young king, born in 1155, became the new heir and the focus of all the dynastic hopes that his parents carried. Eleanor's pregnancy with Henry was closely monitored by physicians and courtiers alike, everyone understanding that this child could determine the future of the Plantagenet lands. His successful birth and healthy development through infancy was seen as proof of divine favor, evidence that Eleanor's marriage to Henry II was blessed by God in ways that her marriage to Louis VII had not been. Matilda, born in 1156, added to the growing Plantagenet nursery and represented another potential marriage alliance for the future. Eleanor approached each pregnancy with increasing confidence, her body now proven capable of producing healthy children with her second husband. The rhythm of pregnancy, birth, and child-rearing became the background against which she conducted the complex business of queenship in territories that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees. Richard, born in 1157, would grow up to become Richard the Lionheart, one of the most famous kings in English history. Eleanor's pregnancy with Richard was marked by her increasing political independence, her growing confidence in her role as queen and mother. She began to assert herself more forcefully in matters of governance, using her position as the mother of heirs to justify her involvement in decisions that traditionally would have been reserved for the king alone. Geoffrey, born in 1158, and Eleanor, born in 1161, completed the remarkable succession of pregnancies that established Eleanor of Aquitaine as one of the most successful royal mothers of the medieval period. Within a decade of her second marriage, she had produced 5 living children who survived infancy, a remarkable achievement in an era when child mortality was devastatingly high. Each child represented not just personal fulfillment but political security for the Plantagenet dynasty. Joanna, born in 1165, and John, born in 1166, were Eleanor's final children, born when she was in her 40s, and already an experienced mother and queen. By this time, her approach to pregnancy and child-rearing had been refined by experience and success. She understood intimately the balance between maternal love and political calculation, the way that royal children must be treasured as individuals while being prepared for their roles as dynastic assets. The spacing and timing of Eleanor's pregnancies tell the story of a woman who had learned to manage her fertility as skillfully as she managed her political relationship. The gaps between children allowed her body to recover while also permitting her to focus on other aspects of queenship, from managing her territories to negotiating with hostile neighbors. She seemed to understand intuitively that successful royal motherhood required pacing and planning as much as love and dedication. Eleanor's influence over her children was profound and lasting, shaped by her own experiences with power, marriage, and political survival. She raised sons who would become kings and daughters who would become queens, yet she also taught them the importance of independence and self-reliance. Her own life had demonstrated that royal women could be political actors in their own right, not just vessels for producing the next generation of rulers. The complexity of Eleanor's relationships with her children reflected the tensions inherent in royal motherhood. She loved them fiercely, yet used them politically, protected them from some dangers while exposing them to others that she deemed necessary for their education. Her rebellion against Henry II in later life was motivated in part by her concern for her sons' futures, her belief that their father was not preparing them adequately for the responsibilities they would inherit. The tragedy that marked Eleanor's later years included the deaths of several of her children, including Henry the young king and Geoffrey, These losses were devastating for a woman who had invested so much of herself in creating and nurturing the Plantagenet dynasty. Yet she bore these griefs with the same strength that had carried her through the challenges of her earlier life, understanding that royal mothers must endure loss as well as celebrate success. Eleanor's legacy as a mother extended far beyond her own children to include her influence on medieval concepts of queenship and royal motherhood. She demonstrated that a queen could be politically active and personally powerful, while also fulfilling her reproductive duties, that motherhood could enhance rather than limit a woman's political effectiveness. Her life became a template for later medieval queens, showing how royal women could navigate the complex demands of dynasty, politics, and personal fulfillment. Her final years were spent watching her surviving children navigate the challenges of ruling in a world that was growing increasingly complex and dangerous. She had given her body to create the Plantagenet dynasty, had shaped her life around ensuring its success, and lived to see her son Richard become one of the most celebrated warriors of his age, and her son John inherit the throne of England. Yet she also understood that each generation must face its own challenges, that even the most devoted mother cannot guarantee her children's success or happiness. The story of Eleanor of Aquitaine reminds us that royal pregnancy and motherhood have always been about more than biology, that the women who bore the children of kings and emperors were also political actors, strategic thinkers, and complex individuals whose lives were shaped by forces beyond their control, yet who found ways to exert their own influence on the course of history. Our final queen steps forward from the mists of Russian history like a figure from a fairy tale, her story unfolding against the backdrop of imperial splendor and revolutionary change. Alexandra Feodorovna, born Princess Alex of Hesse in 1872, would become the last Tsarina of Russia, her life and death marking the end of centuries of imperial rule. Her story of motherhood is perhaps the most poignant of all our queens, shaped by desperate hope, crushing disappointment, and ultimately tragic loss. Alexandra's path to motherhood was complicated from the beginning by the political and personal pressures that surrounded her marriage to Nicholas II. The Russian Empire needed heirs, particularly a male heir to continue the Romanov dynasty, and the weight of this expectation fell heavily on the young German princess who had converted to Russian Orthodoxy for love. Her early years as Tsarina were marked by the constant scrutiny of her fertility, every aspect of her reproductive health becoming a matter of state concern. Olga, born in 1895, was Alexandra's first child and a source of immense personal joy, despite the political disappointment of her gender. The birth was relatively easy, and Alexandra embraced motherhood with an intensity that surprised even those closest to her. She insisted on nursing Olga herself, a decision that scandalized the Russian court, but reflected her determination to be intimately involved in her children's upbringing. The nursery in the Alexander Palace became her sanctuary, a place where she could temporarily escape the pressures of imperial life. The expectation for a male heir intensified after Olga's birth, and Alexandra's subsequent pregnancies were watched with increasing anxiety by the court and the Russian people. Tatiana, born in 1897, was welcomed with love, but also with disappointment that she too was a daughter. Alexandra began to blame herself for her inability to produce sons, interpreting her daughter's births as evidence of divine displeasure or personal failure. This self-blame would become a constant theme in her private correspondence during this period. Maria, born in 1899, was Alexandra's third daughter, and by this time the pressure had become almost unbearable. The Dowager Empress, Nicholas's mother, made no secret of her disappointment with Alexandra's reproductive performance, and courtiers whispered about the possibility of setting aside the Tsarina in favor of a more fertile wife. Alexandra retreated increasingly into her family circle, finding solace in her relationships with her daughters, while struggling with the knowledge that she had not yet fulfilled her primary duty as Tsarina. The medical interventions that Alexandra endured during this period reflected both the advances and limitations of early 20th century medicine. She was attended by the finest physicians in Russia and Europe, subjected to treatments and examinations that were more sophisticated than those available to earlier generations of queens, but still limited by the medical knowledge of the time. Her physicians prescribed rest, special diets, and various medications, yet none could address the fundamental anxiety that accompanied each unsuccessful attempt to produce a male heir. Anastasia, born in 1901, was Alexandra's fourth daughter, and her birth marked a crisis point in the Tsarina's emotional and physical health. The disappointment was crushing, not just for Alexandra but for Nicholas and the entire Russian establishment. The succession remained uncertain, the dynasty vulnerable, and Alexandra's position increasingly precarious. She began to turn to religious advisors and mystics, seeking spiritual explanations for her inability to produce sons and divine intervention to change her situation. The pregnancy that would finally produce Alexei began in 1903, and Alexandra approached it with a mixture of desperate hope and paralyzing fear. She had learned to guard her expectations, yet she could not entirely suppress the belief that this time might be different, that this pregnancy might finally fulfill her dynastic duty and secure her position as Tsarina. The months of pregnancy were marked by intensive prayer, careful attention to every aspect of her health, and the constant awareness that the future of the Romanov dynasty might depend on the child she carried. Alexei's birth in 1904 was celebrated throughout the Russian Empire as the arrival of the long-awaited heir. Alexandra's relief and joy were profound and visible, her happiness infectious as she finally held the son who would continue the dynasty. The early months of Alexei's life were perhaps the happiest of Alexandra's time as Tsarina, as she reveled in her success and the security that came with having produced a male heir. Yet, this happiness would prove tragically short-lived. The discovery of Alexei's hemophilia transformed Alexandra's experience of motherhood from triumph to tragedy. The genetic condition inherited through her own royal bloodline meant that her long-awaited son was constantly in danger of life-threatening bleeding episodes. The irony was cruel beyond measure. She had finally produced the heir the empire needed. Yet that heir was so fragile that his very existence remained constantly in question. Alexandra's response to Alexei's condition was to become intensely protective, surrounding him with layers of care and precaution that isolated the family increasingly from normal court life. She blamed herself for his condition, understanding that she had unknowingly passed the fatal gene to her son. The guilt was overwhelming, compounded by the knowledge that her greatest success as Tsarina had also been her greatest failure as a mother. The years that followed were marked by Alexandra's desperate search for treatments and cures for Alexei's hemophilia. She turned to physicians, mystics, and faith healers, most famously to Grigory Rasputin, whose apparent ability to help Alexei during his crises made him indispensable to the imperial family despite his scandalous reputation. Alexandra's relationship with Rasputin was fundamentally shaped by her maternal desperation, her willingness to do anything that might save her son. The isolation that characterized the imperial family's later years was largely a result of Alexandra's determination to protect Alexei from the dangers of public life. Court ceremonies were curtailed, public appearances became rare, and the family retreated into a private world centered around the nursery and Alexei's health. This isolation contributed to the growing disconnect between the imperial family and the Russian people, a disconnect that would prove fatal when revolution came. Alexandra's letters during this period reveal a woman consumed by maternal anxiety, her every thought focused on her son's welfare and survival. She described his symptoms in minute detail, analyzed every treatment and its effects, and lived in constant fear of the next crisis. Her world had narrowed to the confines of the sick room, her identity as Theresa subsumed by her role as the mother of a desperately ill child. The outbreak of World War I added new dimensions to Alexandra's maternal anxiety. Her German birth made her suspect among many Russians, her association with Rasputin damaged her reputation further, and her focus on Alexei's health was seen as indifference to the suffering of the Russian people. The war years were marked by increasing political instability and personal isolation, as Alexandra struggled to balance her duties as Theresa with her obligations as a mother. The final pregnancies of Alexandra's childbearing years were overshadowed by Alexi's condition and the growing political crisis facing the Romanov dynasty. Each of her daughters was tested for the hemophilia gene, each healthy birth a relief yet also a reminder of the genetic lottery that had afflicted her. The nursery that had once been her sanctuary became a place of constant vigilance, where joy was always tempered by the fear of what might happen next. The revolution that brought down the Romanov dynasty in 1917 transformed Alexandra from Tsarina to prisoner, yet her primary concern remained her children's welfare. Even in captivity, she focused on maintaining their health and education, on preserving some semblance of normal family life despite their extraordinary circumstance. Her final letters reveal a woman who had found peace in her role as a mother, even as everything else in her life crumbled around her. The tragedy that ended Alexandra's life in 1918, when she and her entire family were executed by Bolshevik revolutionaries, was the final chapter in a story that illustrated both the power and the limitations of royal motherhood. She had given everything she could give to her children and to the dynasty, had shaped her entire adult life around her reproductive and maternal duties, yet in the end she could not protect them from the forces of history that were beyond any individual's control. Alexandra's story reminds us that royal pregnancy and motherhood, even in the 20th century, remained profoundly shaped by political pressures and dynastic expectations. Her desperate love for her children, particularly for her ill son, humanizes the broader story of royal reproduction, showing us the intensely personal emotions that accompanied even the most public pregnancy. Her life illustrates the tragic irony that royal mothers, who wielded enormous theoretical power through their reproductive capacity, were often powerless to protect their children from the very forces that made their reproduction politically important. As our journey through these 8 remarkable lives draws to a close, we are left with the echoing memory of women whose bodies served empires, whose wombs carried the weight of dynasties, whose hearts beat with the complex rhythms of love, duty, hope, and law. These queens, separated by centuries and continents, united by the shared experience of royal motherhood, remind us that behind every crown was a woman, behind every dynasty was a mother, behind every throne was someone who had given her body and soul to the service of continuity and power. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the world holds its breath between night and day, their stories whisper to us across the centuries. They speak of the eternal dance between the personal and the political, the private and the public, the individual and the dynasty. They remind us that pregnancy and motherhood, even when they serve the grandest purposes of state, remain profoundly human experiences, shaped by love and fear, hope and disappointment, triumph and tragedy. These 8 queens, these 8 mothers, these 8 women whose stories we have followed through palaces and birthing chambers, through joy and sorrow, through triumph and defeat, leave us with a legacy that transcends their individual circumstance. They show us that royal pregnancy was never just about producing heirs, but about the profound transformation of women who found ways to maintain their humanity, even when their bodies belonged to history. And so, as we settle into the peaceful embrace of sleep, let us carry with us the memory of their courage, their resilience, their love, and their law. Let us remember that behind every great dynasty were women who gave everything they could give, who loved as fiercely as they ruled, who found in motherhood both their greatest power and their deepest vulnerability. Their stories, told in the gentle cadence of night, remind us that even queens, even empresses, even the most powerful women in history, were in the end, mothers first, their hearts forever connected to the children they brought into the world, no matter what the cost.